Hello again and welcome back to our course on PSE 15. In this section we're going to take our first look at albums. And although to some extent you can think of an album as a little like the old style paper photo album, they're a lot more flexible and a lot more powerful in electronic form than they are when you're talking about a book that you have sitting on the coffee table at home with some holiday snaps in it. An album in PSE 15 is a collection of images, and you can pretty much put any of your pictures into an album. To demonstrate albums, I'm going to create an album of pictures of this steam car that I mentioned earlier on in the course. And when I add pictures to an album, I'm not actually making copies of the pictures. Typically in the past, if you were making up a physical album, of course some people still do this, you would get copies of your digital images printed and then may bind those into an album, perhaps to offer as a gift to somebody. With an album in PSE 15, you're not making additional copies, you're just creating a set of pointers to the images that you already have. So to make this first album, let's go over to the panel on the left, click on Albums. And there on the right there's a plus sign there and a drop down, New Album. You can see the album over on the right, and I'm going to give this album a name. I'm going to call it Stanley. That's the maker of the steam car. And as part of the album name, I'm going to use the registration number of the steam car. You can have album categories. I'm going to come back to categories a little bit later on. But to get started, all I'm going to do is create my album by dragging and dropping the images I'm going to use into it. First of all, I'm going to use the image which has got the registration number on it. Then I'm going to use that image that's taken outside a tea shop in the Yorkshire Dales. And then I think one of these other images here, perhaps that one. And then finally an image here of the car setting off along the road. And let's have it just in a sort of cloud of steam at the end there. So there's my album. Click on OK. And it appears under my list of albums on the left. Let me just switch off keywords and info for a moment. One feature of albums is that albums are another way of filtering what you see in media browsers. So now that that album exists, if I click on the album, I will only see the images that are in that album. And in fact, albums are very often used as a good filtering mechanism and a good way, for example, of forming the basis for various artifacts. So for instance, I can use the images in an album as the starting point for a slideshow, or perhaps for making a photo album or a collage. Many aspects of the use of albums I'm going to look at later on in the course. In this section, I'm really just going to concentrate on covering some of the basics so that you can start to put together your own albums. Having put together this album, there is yet another little icon that indicates that an image is in an album. And of course, an image can be in as many albums as you want. Let me just hover over one of these icons. In album Stanley BS9472. Of course, the icon to the right says keyword tag landscape. One thing that you'll certainly want to be able to do is to change the images that are in an album. Let me click on all media again because I'm going to add one or two images to the album. Now right click on the name of the album. I have options there to delete the album or to rename the album, but the one I want on this occasion is edit. That brings up the Edit Album panel on the right. I could change the name there. I could assign the album to an album category. I haven't set up any album categories yet, but I can also change the images that are included. If I want to remove an image, all I need to do is to select it. Say I want to remove that one, and then I've got a little icon down there to remove the selected item from the media bin. If I delete an image from an album, it doesn't of course delete the image from my catalogue, so I'm going to delete that one. I'm going to scroll down back to these images again, and I'm going to choose that one and that one. So I've chosen two images, and I'm going to drag those two into the album. Click on OK. Select my album in the albums panel on the left, and there's my revised set of images. I've shown you there how to remove an image from an album and add an image to an album. Let me go back to all media. As usual with PSC, there are other ways of doing things. So for instance, let's go down to one of these images. Let's suppose that one. If I right click on the icon there for the first image that I added, the one with the registration number on it, one of the options is remove from album. So if I wanted to take this image out of the album, I don't actually have to open the album and do what I did just now to remove an image from it. Similarly, if I wanted to add an image to the album, so let's suppose that I decided that I wanted to say add this image, which isn't currently in the album. Having selected it, I can drag and drop it onto the album, and that is now included in it. A very important property of an album is its sort order, and I'm currently looking at the images here in the default media browser sort order of newest. If I click on this drop down and change it to album order, it'll be in the order that those images are stored in the album. Notice the numbers at the top left corner of each image. If I wanted to change that sequence, and in fact in this case the car was outside this Yorkshire Dales tea shop and then it left during the time that we were there, I want to put that leaving image at the end and the puff of smoke just before it left, just before that, and I want to put the picture with the registration number at the beginning. All the ones in between are fine. That's the album order now, and any time I want to use the album order, for instance in a slideshow or in a photo album, then that's the sequence in which those pictures are in album order. Having covered the main basics of albums, there are just a couple of other things I want to show you in this section related to albums. If I click on folders in the panel on the left, you remember we talked before about the folders. We've got these shot date folders, each of which contains images that were taken on a particular shot date. If I right click on a folder name, one of the options is create an instant album, and that will create an album of those images. I can give it a name. I can then adapt or adjust the images that are included, but it's a very good way of making an album of images, for example, made on a particular day. Some of these other folders have different combinations of media in them, including images. And while we're talking about my folders, this is a list of folders. It's not a structured list, it's a list of folders by name. If I click on the little icon here, one of the options is View as Tree. If you look at the folder symbols on the left, you'll see that some of them have a little icon in them, some of them don't. The ones with the little icon in them, if you click on them, you're going to see some images, possibly other media. And if I right click on any of those, I have the option to create an instant album. Down here I have other drives, such as my E drive, which is another hard drive on the device. And if I drill down to the E drive, I'll eventually get to the PSE15 exercise files folder. If I right clicked on that, then I could make an album out of the images in the PSE15 exercise files folder. If there are external drives mentioned here, of course they may not be attached. I may not be able to look at the images themselves, although if they're part of my catalogue, there will be thumbnails in the catalogue. So the tree view is a useful way of looking at how the images in your catalogue are stored, and also gives you a good way of getting to folders and creating instant albums from the contents of folders, although of course only to media that are included in the catalogue. And one final point to note about albums at the moment, as you'll see later on, when you capture images, there is an option to automatically make an album out of a batch of images, but more on that later on. That's it on albums for the moment, and in fact on the organizer. I'll see you in the next section.